Hello, readers. So, when we last met at the beginning of our reading unit, you were given the task of going home and reading in your own books and applying what we did together in class to your own books and to your own characters. So, I want you to consider that thinking work that you did for your homework. And I want you to share the insights that you found with your partner. So we did some important reading work in Popularity, the book that I read to you, the short story that I read to you. And we looked over and talked about some of Will's character traits. So what we did is we began thinking deeply about one of our characters. And we talked about how we expect characters to be complicated and show more than one trait. And then, as we talked about Will, we talked about some of those character traits that he was displaying, such as whether or not he was lonely, or was he isolated? Was he bitter, or was he sarcastic? Clever or observant, and so on. So last night, or the night before, you read your own novels and investigated some of your main characters' traits. Now, I want you to take a second and get out that jotting. Actually, it would have been from last night and the night before. And I want you to put a star on the jot that describes your character's strongest trait, or even if they display more than one strong trait. And I want you to think about that. Which traits seem especially dominant? So jot that down. Okay, so as you're thinking, maybe if you have a character, for example, that seems brave, and she seems unusually brave. Think about, when you're thinking about your characters, do you think that that character, for example, might be braver? Does she seem braver than others in her world or in the book when you're comparing her to other characters? What if you come across a character you think that might be intimidating, for example? And let's say your partner is not reading the same book. You're just reading the same genre. So can you show your partner a passage that captures how intimidating or brave or whatever the character trait may be? Show your partner a passage that might capture that. And see if your partner agrees or if they think that that character is displaying something different. So I want you to go ahead and do that now in class, students. Share and talk with your partner. Online students, maybe just be thinking about this and jot more things down if you don't have anyone to share with at home. Okay, readers, so let's come back together. Now, the work you did is the same as the work we did in Popularity, but your books are different, so you found different traits. Some characters might seem foolish or silly, some might seem tough, some might just seem scary. So what's most important is that the work you did yesterday isn't work you only do in Popularity. You're doing similar thinking work in your own independent books, and you're watching how that thinking plays out differently with the characters in different books. So in other words, you're doing the same work, but it may seem different based on your book and your characters that you are investigating. So as you did this work, did you sometimes find yourself changing your mind as you kept reading? I often do this when I'm reading. For example, I read The Hunger Games recently, and I found myself changing my mind about Katniss's traits. So at first I was thinking, wow, she's strong. And then I kind of started thinking, well, I'm not so sure now she's strong, and maybe that's why she doesn't trust anyone. Maybe she's not as strong as I thought. So this is the kind of thinking and rethinking that's very important for you to be doing as a reader. And it's often where your best thinking is going to occur. So readers, today I want to teach you that in complicated stories, characters reveal themselves over time. Experienced readers are alert to new details, and they're ready to rethink and revise their first ideas in the face of new evidence. So over the course of your reading, you'll notice that your thinking will change. So that brings us to this part of our reading that we're doing, where we're revising our thinking in the face of new evidence. And that just means that readers, as they read, they generate an idea about a character, and then they read with that idea in mind, and then as they read, they look for evidence to confirm that idea or to revise that idea. Okay, readers, let's try this work with Will's traits and popularity. So first we have an idea about a character. We documented that here on our Post-it notes. So let's go back to that idea from yesterday at the start of the story. And that's where we said that Will seems bitter. Now, once you have a theory about a character, it's important to read on with that theory in mind, looking to see if there's compelling evidence to support that theory. So let's look for evidence that Will seems bitter. So one piece of evidence that seems strong is that Will talks about how much he hates picking clovers with the Allens. Another piece of evidence is that he's been doing this for 6 months. So let's look at those parts. So here it says, we've been looking for four-leaf clovers every school day for 6 months. And each of us knew exactly what he'd do if he ever found one. He'd hold the lucky clover tight in his hand, close his eyes, in which he was so popular he'd never have to spend time with the other two again. Okay, so let's go back and look at that sticky note. Okay, so I've added here to bitter or sarcastic my evidence that he hates picking clovers with the Allens, and he's been doing this for 6 months. So this is what I'm going to call a theory chart that I've created here, okay? And now I want to go back and I want to look at that text again. Okay. So I'm seeing here, after Will leaves the Allens and joins the popular kids, it's not very clear to me whether he's still bitter. I'm thinking about whether he was bitter, or was it something else, or does his personality change? Let's go back and reread. So he says, I wondered what my position in the group might be. I certainly wasn't a great athlete, student, or ladies' man, but I did have a sense of humor. Maybe I could be the second funniest boy in the 4th grade. My thoughts went no further because the bell ending recess rang. But that night, just before I fell asleep, I saw myself standing in the center of the popular boys, telling the funniest stories anyone had ever heard. I saw Sean Owens doubled up with laughter. I saw myself triumphant. So, readers, what I'm doing here that you can also do in your own books is take a trait and think about whether it really holds true across the text. So in this instance, I was kind of expecting Will to go on being bitter forever. But later, as we read on, he seems kind of different, doesn't he? I'm thinking that he changes across the story, so he's not going to stay bitter the whole time. Have you ever met someone and you formed an opinion about that person, and then as time goes on, you realize he or she is not exactly what you thought originally? It turns out maybe you were wrong, or they change. So characters in books can be the same way. And it really is important that you look across the book and you gather evidence as you read And then you realize that evidence will often change your theory about the character. So here with Will, I'm starting to see a new side of him. And later in the story, he imagines the new position he wants in the group with great detail. So he seems hopeful and confident that he can get what he wants. And this makes me think he's more optimistic than I realized before. So maybe at the start he wasn't bitter so much as he was longing. Okay, so let's go back to our theory chart where we talked about him being bitter or maybe sarcastic. And since we have gathered more evidence and we've read more, I think that we can maybe change our thinking, because now he seems like he is longing, possibly. Maybe not necessarily being sarcastic. So he maybe starts out as bitter, but then he changes, and he seems to become more hopeful. This is where he hopes he can be the funniest in his grade. He imagines new roles that he'll play in the group. So he doesn't seem very bitter or sarcastic in this part where he is talking about these things. So readers, do you see what we did here? We read on, alert to the text that might add or change to our thinking. And as we did, we collected more evidence of the character's traits. Then we weighed that evidence and we rethought our initial theories. So we found a way to capture that new thinking on what we're going to call a theory chart. Okay, students, so now it's your turn. Now, I'm sure there are character traits you thought about at the beginning of your stories. And now, as you move forward, are you going to focus on one trait and think about new parts of the story? Do those parts contain more evidence of that trait, or is there evidence that pushes you to revise your thinking? For example, when I had spoken about Katniss in the Hunger Games, at first I thought that she was not just tough, but hard and strong. But then I saw how devastated she was about Rue dying. And that doesn't really go with my theory of her being hard-hearted. So now I'm thinking it's not so much that she's hard as that she's determined. So these are the things I want you to be thinking about. What about your novel? Are you far enough in your book to have formed a theory about a character and to have found more evidence that can inform that theory? If you're not that far in your book, I want you to think of another book that you've read, or even maybe a movie you've seen. Can you remember a time when you started with one theory about a character, but then when you looked further into the text for more evidence, you ended up thinking new thoughts? When you have an example of a trait that you've rethought, give me a thumbs up. Okay, so now in class, students, I want you to turn and talk with your partner and share your thinking. Online students, maybe just think about this or jot it down if you'd like to, your thinking, or you can share with someone at home. Okay, readers, I'd like to gather you back. So I'm hoping that some of you went back to specific pages where you left Post-it notes in your books. And hopefully you were looking forward in the text, thinking about whether those pages pushed you to change your initial thinking. Maybe grouping some of your Post-its in your notebook under certain traits. If you had more time, you could capture not only your first theory, but also your newest thinking on a theory chart. So hopefully some of you were able to do that. If not, you may want to go back and do that later. So readers, as you go off to read today, it's important to make a plan for your work. You won't be just reading. Instead, go back to some initial theories about your characters that you had. And then look forward in the text as you read, noticing how upcoming text informs or challenges your initial ideas. Make sure that today you don't just collect more Post-its about the characters in your book, Be sure you also read on with some of your initial theories in mind, and as you read on, collect more evidence that relates to your theory, or make a decision to revise those theories. Now, before you begin reading, I want you to take a second to reread your post-its or your notes that you've already written, and I want you to rethink your ideas and to capture at least one theory that you have about a character. I'll pass out some more post-it notes to my in-class students that you can use to capture and track your theory as you read. And you can put these in your notebooks. And for my in-class students, you can continue to work on the digital notebooks that you started. I will either, if you're not able to access that, I will post a new notebook for you that you can use. So I want you to take a second and tell your partner which character you're going to investigate today and what theory you're starting with. Now, before I send you off to read, I want to show you just a few examples of what rethinking a character's traits might look like with a theory chart. So here's a character from the book The Giver. I'll be passing all of these out in class. Here's a larger look at that. And online students, I will also be putting these in Google Classroom. And here we have another example of a theory chart from the book Divergent. And this is about a character. This is where the reader initially thought that Tris seemed weak, but then that thinking was changed. Okay, so before I send you off to read, I wanted to tell you about your homework for tonight. So tonight you're going to have two jobs. First, I want you reading up a storm. Not yesterday, but the previous homework that you had for my in-class students, you were supposed to read for at least 30 minutes and tracked your reading. Now I want you to look back at that number, and so that means that you should be reading at least that many pages tonight, okay? And every night from here on out. So if you do want to read more, feel free. Then after that, your second part of your homework is to take a few minutes to create your first, well, this won't be our first reading notebook page. This will probably be your third reading notebook page. And it'll be based on the plan that you made today, okay? So I want you to be developing new thinking, jotting down your thoughts using diagrams, sketches, timelines, etc. And I want you to do these things to capture your thinking, okay? And then you're going to share that thinking and your notebook pages tomorrow in class, okay? So off you go.